Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week on the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name's Josh. This is going to be for the week of February 20th. Thanks for tuning in once again. If you're new to Best and Worst Track of the Week, all it is a weekly segment I do on this podcast where I take all new entries onto the Billboard Hot 100, take one that's the worst, take one that's the best, and give each track a letter grade. But yeah, this has been a little bit more of a busier week in comparison to the last couple of weeks. So definitely a lot more interesting tracks in terms of what I think will be sticking around or consequential for the months to come or weeks to come. In comparison to last week. If you did not tune into that episode, it was Lil Durk and Pooh Shiesty versus Tom MacDonald. That Tom MacDonald track was complete garbage. I don't really have to go into it too much, but yeah. And the Lil Durk and Pooh Shiesty track was just a decent trap banger that, I don't know, it kind of gave me some vibes of the chemistry Lil Wayne and Gucci Mane had back in the day. But anyways, yeah, that was last week. Not too much went on there. This week we're covering tracks from artists like Jason Derulo's on here with Adam Levine, Mike Towers, Pooh Shiesty again, Ava Max, Dan and Shay. But yeah, so just kind of a sample of what's to come. And just before we get started, I just want to let everyone know the most recent episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast dropped yesterday at the point of taping this. It was an album review by the Foo Fighters, Medicine at Midnight. If you haven't listened to that yet, go ahead and check out that episode and also check out that Foo Fighters album if you're interested. Interesting album by them overall. Not too different from a lot of the material they've been dropping thus far, but still I think it's probably worth the listen if you're a rock fan in general or just curious about what the Foo Fighters are doing right now. But anyways, yeah, this is, let's go ahead and get into this week's episode. Like I said, this is for the week of February 20th. In terms of chart movement, it was quite dynamic. A lot of stuff dropped this week on the top 10, except Driver's License by Olivia Rodrigo, which is still at number 1 at this point. I really don't know how that's happening. For instance, Cardi B's debuted a track at number 2 with Up. So that kind of just tells you how massive this Driver's License track is. If Cardi B couldn't even kick it out of number 1. At this point, I don't really know. I guess it's just a bunch of sad teenage girls, which there's probably no shortage of, that are just really digging into this Olivia Rodrigo track. But yeah, Cardi B came in with a new track this week. We'll get to that later. Also in the top 10, What You Know About Love by Pop Smoke. I thought it was pretty interesting how old this track is at this point. Going up to number 10 this week. I guess it's late bloomer in terms of hits for the late Pop Smoke. Also, Da Kitty by Bad Bunny and Jay Cortez. Another track that's just been hanging around the charts for a while. Up to 19. I don't know really where that boost came from, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And then also AJR's Bang. All the way down to number 23. It looks like its run is over. It did drop last week, but it's the momentum's there for a free fall at this point. So it had its run. Pretty interesting anomaly overall, I think. And then also Just the Way by Parmalee and Blanco Brown up to 42. A couple months ago, I think we covered that track. I thought it was pretty bad. Sanitary. It's taking some upward movement, so it looks like that might become a hit. I think it's probably getting picked up at this point by radio play. And then also Put Your Records On by Rit Momney up to 45. That's not too surprising. Now, it did kind of drop out at some point, but it did come back on, and its trajectory has just been upward ever since. I know it's getting a lot of play on all in indie radio, maybe even pop radio at this point. So it's a pretty big song overall at this point. Also, Heat Waves by Glass Animals up to 69. Kind of surprised it got to there, but at the same time, my whole narrative behind this track, I guess, has been that it's kind of like it took Post Malone's formula of like all his mega banger hits, and the only difference is Post Malone isn't on this track, but I could easily see a Post Malone track at one point, or maybe in the past, sounding just like this. Also, You Got It by Vito up to 688. That I thought was pretty interesting, just because it dropped out a long time ago, because I covered the debut of that track several months ago, and for some reason it made it back on, and it's gaining some traction. We'll see where it goes. And then also What's Poppin' by Jack Harlow finally dropped out after several months, and its domination of the number one spot at one point. Also 7 Summers Ago by Morgan Wallen out. Don't know if that's really has to do anything with controversy, because he had several tracks this week that went up, but that was a big hit for him that finally dropped out. Diamonds by Sam Smith out as well. Baila Conmigo by Selena Gomez out, which debuted already and kind of already bit the dust. And then also, of course, the Pure Garbage That Is Fake Woke, as expected, dropped out. Don't really care if you got a number one on iTunes. To me, that really doesn't mean anything. But anyways, let's go ahead and let's get into these tracks this week. First was Quicksand by Moray, coming in at 100. Don't know anything about this artist other than it seems like they're pretty inspired by like the Rod Wave type of soul rap thing going on. It sounds like the instrumental overall sounds like a Rod Wave instrumental. Vocal stylization kind of similar to Roddy Ricch, but not quite there at that level. I will say the track does get better as it progresses, because as it kicks off, like as soon as I heard the track, I wasn't really feeling it. It kind of reminded me of like YouTuber quality, like pop or trap music, just like when an influencer wants to step into music for some reason. But by the second verse, they definitely start showing some versatility, some chops that go beyond that like very introductory, like, I don't know, I'm just doing this for clout type thing. And it kind of goes beyond what I was thinking of the track at the beginning. So definitely has some earworminess to it, but it's not super hooky at the same time. I was kind of mad. I gave it a B minus. Next track was an interesting one. It was Lifestyle by Jason Derulo and Adam Levine. I don't know about you, but we didn't really need this collab, but I guess it was kind of written in the stars. For some reason, the song's aesthetic kind of just took me back to like the loose tropical feeling a track like maybe Senorita had by Camila Cabello, but for some reason I ended up hating this track just as much as that one. Some cheap songwriting techniques in the chorus that are quite similar to like a track like Senorita. A shit tier Adam Levine verse. I don't think I've ever heard Adam Levine really give less effort on something, but by now he doesn't really need to do much. It honestly sounds the level of sadness if like Sting was going on pop verses and just for features in order to stay relevant. It sounds that bad. It's a short track too. It doesn't really go anywhere, develop much. It kind of just drops verses and choruses and then it's done. I gave this track an F. Next track was Bandito by Mike Towers and Hoon, if we're saying it in a Latin or Spanish pronunciation. Definitely know who Mike Towers is, but I was not impressed really much by this Hoon fella. He kind of sounds like Nav, honestly, and with a really nasally tone. Kind of but not even as interesting as Nav. The track overall has a lighthearted feel to it that comes like from like this light syncopated guitar on the track. It's like, if you will, it's like a anti-Bad Bunny reggaeton track aesthetically. Like it's playful and light, not really showing much other than that. Like if you're comparing like that to Bad Bunny tracks that are sometimes dark or angry or aggressive, this is the exact opposite of that. I wouldn't really honestly think too much of it if I heard it like on a reggaeton Latin pop playlist. I would probably think it was a bit boring in terms of like what's out there right now. Not much flavor to it. I give this track a D. Next track was No More Parties by Coi Leray. Um, don't really know much about this artist other than they're the offspring of some former rapper that had some relevance at some point. The track overall, like their presentation and performance, sounds kind of like a combination between like Playboy Cardi and Lil Durk, in my opinion. It sounds a lot like they're trying to copy Playboy Cardi on purpose. It's just the stylization of the, I guess, of the flow and ad libs are a little bit similar, a little too similar. But the performance, in my opinion, the problem is just it's very stagnant and a bit of a pop culture reference. The tone on this artist's voice sounds at times like the character Money from the reality TV show Little Woman Atlanta, if you know what I'm talking about. That's all I'll say about this track. I gave it a C. Next track was My Head and My Heart by Ava Max at 82. This was one of the more interesting tracks of the week, mainly because of the sample of a popular EDM track from the 90s. The track has like a sort of nice flair to it once we get like more support from like the syncopated and bouncy synth material, especially like on that pre-chorus. But it's just pretty damn similar to the original though. Like they didn't really go beyond much of like the original structure of that of the original track. But I will say the production is pretty solid here. There's a crisp drum track here going on throughout the track. Some powerful vocals from Ava Max at times. But I was expecting a bit more from Ava Max here. I gave it a C+. Next track was Provide by G-Eazy featuring Chris Brown and Mark Morrison. Yes, Mark Morrison from Return of the Mac from the 90s. I guess this week was let's sample for the 90s this week and hope we get a hit. At first, I was really offended that they sampled the classic of Return of the Mac. In my opinion, the sample deserves a lot more than G-Eazy and Chris Brown. Like, I would have preferred even Drake getting this sample and doing something with it. Or, I don't know, whoever the hell. But at least they gave credit to Mark Morrison. The title, maybe that'll give a resurgence of discovering the man's work. But the track keeps the 90s vibe to it, at least. It didn't sound like they were going for something too different from the original, which I know I kind of just said that the Ava Max track didn't do that. But in here, I really think preserving that 90s vibe was essential, especially to a classic R&B hip-hop track like this. But any competent rapper could have pulled that off, really, that had a good producer. So G-Eazy just happened to be the feature. And G just sounds enthusiastic on here. He seems, I heard other takes too that he sounded bored. I don't know if he was bored, but the performance just wasn't really there. I expected a bit more. Chris Brown's isn't very consequential on this track either. He's just there. I gave this track a D. Next track was GNF OK by Polo G 55. Not much to say about this other than it's a pretty aggressive right off the bat from the opening. Track has a lot of grit. Typical aggressive gangster rap flow here. Fast flow with a lot of enthusiasm all throughout the performance. Track has a bit of a nice ambience to it with like some airy synth textures. It's not bad. It's short, but it's okay. I give it a B. Next track was Neighbors by Pooh Shiesty featuring Big 30 at 51. This track, I like the bright and colorful synthy moments on the verses. Pretty typical Pooh from here, what I heard. He sounds like Gucci Mane again. My problem is that Big 30 sounds even more like Gucci Mane. Like, I didn't even know that was possible. The track has a bit of a murky nature to it overall. In my opinion, this is just an odd track. It doesn't really even sound like there's a feature on here. It just sounds like someone was trying to do a Gucci Mane impersonation and got better as a track progressed. So I gave the track a C. Next track was Time Today by Moneybago at 37. Still not really seeing the appeal from Moneybago. He had a pretty, lingering track on the Hot 100 last year that I covered. Don't remember really what the track sounds like, but I thought it was overrated as hell for it staying as long as it did and peaking as high as it did. This track, I'm not really feeling any more differently. I just can't get into the way that his voice is coming through, especially on the mix. It sounds a tad exposed, in my opinion, and not in a good way. The beat is pretty skeletal. Any supplemental melodic material on the track doesn't come through much at all. It makes the track sound quite bare. And then also his flow and presentation is very DaBaby-like, but nowhere near on the charisma or execution he does that. So give the track a C. Next track was Up by Cardi B at number 2. Was really surprised by this track. Usually I'm not a huge proponent of Cardi B. I don't hate her, but I think there's a ton of other, if we're getting specific, a ton of other female rappers in the game right now that could wrap circles around her, if we're being honest. But on this track, it seems like she improved. The beat's solid on here. It seems like she finally improved her flow a bit better. You can actually hear some rhythmic variation, and it really jives well with the beat. It's smooth. I like the electronic elements that are thrown in all throughout this beat as well. They make the track a lot more colorful. Some really huge bass sub hits on certain moments in the track that really give some energy to the track. And I like the brashness of some of her lyrics and the presence she has all throughout this track. She's unapologetic. She's gritty, and it's a decent track. I give it a B. And now we get to the best and worst track of the week. I always start on the worst track of the week, so we leave on a positive note. And if you have heard a couple episodes of best and worst track of the week, and you saw that Dan and Shay, I mentioned Dan and Shay earlier, you're probably not surprised that they got worst track of the week. Glad You Exist is the worst track of the week. I really tried going in with an open mind. I was really hoping they were doing something a bit different. They could do something a bit differently, or that would come out not hating this, but they proved me wrong, and really makes it hard to give them any future chances. And this track exemplifies my main gripe of Dan and Shay in general. They're just very sanitary. This sound in this track is sanitary as hell. Just like most Dan and Shay tracks. And I don't know, I kind of had an idea while listening to this. Are they basically just this generation's Rascal Flatts at this point? Because if we're being honest, Rascal Flatts was kind of doing that thing in the 2000s. A white guy with a pretty voice that pulls on the heartstrings of countless stay-at-home moms. Take that with what you will. But they must know their audience pretty well, because people are eating this kind of stuff up and they're staying relevant. So kudos to them on perfecting that specific niche of stay-at-home mom music. But the bridge is just so awkward and lazily put together, if I'm critiquing the songwriting. And there's really no payoff going anywhere else on this track. So that's why I got worst track of the week. Best track of the week was Box of Churches by Pooh Shiesty featuring 21 Savage. I will admit, when I first heard Pooh Shiesty, didn't know what the big deal is, but the more I've heard his tracks, he definitely has a certain style to him. He's kind of like trying to find his own niche in like this gangster rap hood sort of corner of rap right now. And this track is just, in my opinion, it's authentic. It's a track about making comparisons, about, I guess, showing people how far he's progressed, but also how he still has the hood life into him. That's the reference of Box of Churches. He's talking about Church's chicken and how he'd eat that over a steak any day of the week, I guess. Kind of just like a different scope or filter on like a sort of Jenny from the Block by J-Lo type of track. But the track overall has like a bit of a spacey and underground rap type beat on it. I kind of dug that off the bat. He does give his typical Gucci Mane like performance on here. But his flow is pretty solid throughout the track. It's very smooth. 21 here though sounds a bit abrupt when he comes in. He sounds a bit more natural as the track progresses. So I will say, like, he does pick up the song, or the song does pick up a bit the more he goes. But he does have a pretty short and quick verse. I expected a bit more from him, but it's a feature. But I actually was impressed by Pooh Shiesty a little bit more on this track, so that's why I got Best Track of the Week here. But yeah, if you stuck around to the end of this episode, thanks for sticking with me and tuning in. Tune in next week if you want to hear my thoughts next week for the exact same thing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Give me some feedback, good or bad. And subscribe on your respective streaming service if you want to. I will be dropping some album reviews here in the near future. Just take care of yourselves.